now threatening to sink Japan and blast the U.S., quote, into ashes and darkness. This as reports reveal the rogue regime's September 3rd nuclear test may have been even more powerful than previously thought, with satellite images showing increased activity at the testing site. Possibly another detonation is in the works.
Meantime, officials in North Korea threatening to reduce the United States to, quote, ashes and darkness and to sink Japan. That's according to state media there. It comes after the United Nations passed new sanctions against the country because of its latest nuclear test. Earlier this month, Kim Jong Un conducted the country's 6th nuclear test. Analysts say it was the most powerful test yet. The latest threat comes amid reports that North Korea may be preparing for yet another missile test. It also comes as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson meets with his counterparts from around the world in London to discuss North Korea.
This is a Fox News alert. North Korea has fired off another missile. It headed toward Japan. The Japanese government is saying it went over Japan into the Pacific. Let's go live now to senior foreign affairs correspondent Greg Palcott in Seoul, South Korea right now. Greg.
Brett, we're getting the information from a variety of sources. It appears that this projectile, this missile launched from the area around Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea, just a little bit before 7 a.m. local time here in the Korean Peninsula. That would be about a half an hour ago. It then flew eastwards, and by all accounts, it crossed the Sea of Japan, and it crossed the Hokkaido Island, the northern island in the archipelago of Japan, and apparently went further through into the Pacific Ocean. Now, this is the second time that this sort of trajectory has occurred with missiles coming from North Korea in recent weeks. It has alarmed Japan. It has called individuals, citizens, to go to shelters. We have seen that happen before in the last blast. We do not know whether this is an intermediate blast, whether it is an intercontinental ballistic missile. There was some speculation that a flattened trajectory launch could be made from North Korea. Once again, it would have to fly over Japan to reach its goal. If it was this flattened trajectory launching of a missile, then it could go deeper into the Pacific. We're waiting on that now. Of course, all of this is happening while North Korea very busy with its own rhetoric, its own talking, not just about the United States, but in fact about Japan during the day. Let's take a listen to what's been said today. Kim Jong-un's regime did launch more rhetoric in the wake of the latest UN sanctions. State media saying Pyongyang ought to use its nuclear weapons to reduce the U.S. to ashes and darkness, and U.S. ally Japan should be sunken into the sea. Japanese Prime Minister Abe, on a visit to India, stood his ground.
The whole of the international community must fully implement the recently adopted United Nations Security Council resolution and force North Korea to change its policy.
Secretary of State Tillerson in London, meeting with UK Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson and others, also promoted the UN resolution. Additionally, he called on North Korea ally China to do more.
I am hopeful that China, as a great country, a world power, will decide on their own and will take it upon themselves to use that very powerful tool of oil supply to persuade North Korea to reconsider its current path towards weapons development.
Back in Seoul, some are more pessimistic about the prospect of reining in the North Korean regime.
I don't think, unfortunately, there is any way to stop them now.
No way.
No way.
Leading North Korea analyst Andrei Lankov thinks that the North will resist sanctions and will only come to the negotiating table to freeze its nukes in exchange for concessions.
They want to get to the point when they have a sufficient number of their intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of destroying a sufficient number of the American cities.
Again, analyst Lankoff talking about North Korea building up an arsenal of intercontinental ballistic missiles that could hit the United States. We don't know exactly what this missile was that was launched from Pyongyang in the direction of Japan, over that into the Pacific Ocean, but certainly it is a part of this ongoing, very active missile testing program that we have seen from North Korea, coupled with a test a short while ago of a nuclear device, and it is an arsenal that now is beginning to be reckoned with. Brett.
You know, Greg, the last missile test was late August, and it was classified as an intermediate-range ballistic missile flying over Japan. Actually, that same area, that island you mentioned, Hokkaido Island, and there were U.S. Marines training on that island at the time when that missile flew over. They were not in danger, we're told by the Pentagon. I want to ask you about South Korea's reaction to all of this, and if their response has changed in recent days as North Korea has become more aggressive.
Japan and South Korea have become more aggressive towards this. We heard from Japanese Prime Minister Abe today demanding that the recent UN Security Council resolution be implemented, criticizing some very strong rhetoric that we had just heard, talking about Japan being sunk into the sea this morning on state media in North Korea. Maybe a hint of what was to come just about 24 hours later. Japan getting tougher, South Korea getting tougher. We've been watching the government here much more saber rattling, much more military exercises. They realize they have a regional defense issue that they're dealing with, just as the U.S. deals with a longer range threat, Brett.
I hear all these North Korean experts, one guy in particular, Andrei Lankoff, saying that everybody underestimated the progress of both the missile and the nuclear program in the North Koreans. How could that be?
Well, because it's very difficult to know what's going on inside of North Korea. It's a very tough intelligence target. And, David, this has been going on for many years. I've been following North Korea for many years. And when I was on the Hill many years ago, there was a thing called the Rumsfeld Commission back in the late 1990s that looked at this. And it turns out that because we don't have we have imperfect knowledge, that it's often these countries are able to move along faster than we expect they would.
So based, excuse me, Peter, but based on that, based on what we now know they are capable of and how badly we were prognosticating about how quickly they could do things, when will they be able to put a nuclear weapon on top of a missile and hit a target in, say, Japan?
I think they can already do that. You know, yeah, I think they can already do that, David. There's questions about longer distance flight because of the tremendous G-forces and vibrations and temperatures that a warhead has to withstand over great distances. I mean, a warhead in its terminal phase, an ICBM warhead in its terminal phase is probably moving about 15,000 miles per hour. So that's the challenge. There's also accuracy issues. Japan is close. Guam, Hawaii, Alaska, the continental United States is much further away, so it's much more difficult. So the reliability of their missiles, the reliability of their warheads are still big questions, but we have to assume the worst.
Boy, that's bad news. Meanwhile, Russia is kicking off a week of war games with its last remaining Eastern European ally, Belarus. Many in the region are very worried, remembering that the Russian invasion of Crimea actually started as a war exercise. Peter, first of all, do we know how many troops are involved here? A lot of misreporting on this.
Yeah, very interesting. Russia's saying it's about 12,500, 12,700, which is interesting because they are under international agreement. They're required to allow observers if they exceed 13,000. So they're staying below that number. Now, the Pentagon and others think it's going to be about 100,000 Russian and Belarusian troops, which far exceeds that. So we'll have to see. You know, we're obviously watching it very closely with all our intelligence assets, but the Russians are probably not being quite straight with us on the numbers.
Well, you look at the map there, and you see that the people who are really worried are on the west side of that map. Of course, these are former Eastern European countries that were under the Soviet orbit. The name of the exercise is called Zapad 17. That means West 2017. That has these folks even more worried.
Sure. I mean, the Russians basically break up their exercises by the geographical area. Zapad, they do it about every 4 years. And this is obviously comes up when you're in Belarus and you're in Western Russia. You're up against Poland, Lithuania, the Baltic states. They're obviously very nervous. You pointed out what happened in 2014 with Crimea, but also back in 2008, the Russians had large exercises that led to the intervention in Georgia.